What would make someone with no direct family ties to World War II spend over 2 weeks walking where the Real Easy Company fought? On this episode, we'll meet John Healy, an Ireland native who took the original Band of Brothers tour, shaped by historian Stephen Ambrose, and Easy Company's own Major Dick Winters. What he found and what he was told on his last day surprised even us. Hi everyone, and welcome to Our WWII Dad. I'm Chris Cangella, of course, alongside my brother Ken Cangella, and it's been a bit since our last episode, so thanks so much for sticking around. And if you're new to the podcast, we're so glad that you're here.
We started this podcast to honor our father, Private First Class Louis Cangella, who served in Europe with the 99th Infantry Battalion during World War II. But the show has grown into something much bigger, a place where we also get to hear from others who carry the stories of their own World War II heroes.
That's so right, Ken, and today we got something very special. We're talking to someone who not only shares our passion for World War II history, but also went on a powerful journey of his own that brought one of the most iconic World War II stories to life in an incredible, real way. So let's get right into it. All right, we have to start this off properly. Flash.
Thunder.
Of course you guys are going to get that right. That never gets old. For anyone out there who might not know, flash and thunder were the call and answer signals the Allied soldiers would use during World War II to ensure that they were talking to a friend and not an enemy. And I got two friends here with me today. First, those guys would always say thunder without missing a beat if flash was said. So my brother Ken is here with us, and our new friend and guest for today, John Healy.
Welcome, John. It's great to have you on the podcast with us today. I've been looking forward to this episode for quite some time. But before we get started, Chris, I have a question for you. Do you know where the word thunder came from, why they chose that word?
I don't think so, no. Why?
There are a couple of reasons. Number one was for the soldiers going into their first combat mission. It was something easy to remember. It made sense logically for thunder to follow the word flash. So in the heat of battle, they would remember it. But more importantly was it could not be easily duplicated. So you have heard of the German name, well, we would pronounce it Gunther, right?
Yeah.
The Germans would pronounce it Gunther. So the TH sound for them was a T sound, and therefore to say thunder would be harder for them and would unmask them if they were truly an enemy.
I didn't know that. That's so cool. And wasn't there like a sound too before they said some words?
There was, that's right, Chris, a clicker. They used to use a clicker. The paratroopers were equipped with a clicker going into a combat. And the clicker was also designed to allow them to identify friend or foe. So particularly, you could imagine landing in the dark. One click meant you were waiting for one click and then wait for a response, and 2 clicks was the response expected. So you knew you had friend, and if there was no click response or more than 2, you knew it was something not a friend. And so they were all equipped with the clickers as they went in as well.
This is going to be great, guys. You're already a wealth of knowledge so far. So let's get into it a little bit now. A little background for everybody. John, you're originally from Ireland, but you're living in Arizona now. And unlike Ken and me, we were both drawn into World War history through our dad's service over there. You discovered it on your own, right?
Yeah. And firstly, thank you for the opportunity to be on the show with you guys. It's a thrill for me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion as well. But you're right, growing up in Ireland, I guess interest in World War II or world wars in general and military in general was maybe a childhood thing, right? We had, a weekly magazine or a comic called Warlord. We all had that. Everyone was excited about the romanticism of battle and armies, and all of that went with it. And then as the years went on, became a little bit more interested in learning a bit more behind it. And I have a distinct memory of a weekly periodical that came out about World War II. One of these multi-volume, you collect it by the weeks, buy a volume, put it in a binder. And I was super thrilled because there was so much in this packed in magazine. I think it was an Orbis publication or one of those color pictures, lots of insight. So I became really interested in it. But I do remember an event, Chris, I'll share with you when I was sharing this with my grandmother. My grandmother was living with us at the time. I know much about the history at the family level or at the personal level. And she asked me what I was reading one day. She said, "What are you looking through?" And I said, "Oh, I'm delighted to show her my color magazine all about World War II." And she looked at me and she said, "You don't need to read about that, and I don't need to see it. I lived through it." And it was like a bolt of lightning. And I can still remember it that vividly, that there is a story behind these campaigns that's deeply personal for those who've experienced it. And if I fast forward to, my interests today, many, many years later, it's still the same from a history perspective. I truly enjoy history, military history, probably specifically more so, but it's because of what the stories the stories that we learn behind the events that are so interesting to me. The impact they had, the people that were involved, the personalities, the way they lived through them. I find that incredibly fascinating. Not just because of what they experienced, but what lessons we also learned from that. So that's really where the interest came from, and it's just continued to fuel a passion for it today.
You're right. And wasn't Ireland kind of neutral? And I guess you wouldn't have anybody that would serve in World War II, would
Yeah,
you?
I mean, the country, until very recently, actually has considered itself to be technically a neutral country, like Switzerland. It doesn't take sort of sides in these global conflicts. And certainly at the time of World War II, World War One and World War II, there was no official involvement. But people from the country did enlist, mostly through the British Army, where they felt strongly enough and passionately enough. And actually, similarly, that same grandmother, her brother, one of her brothers, was lost in World War One. We think in the Battle of the Somme, we never really knew he was lost and not heard of again. And we also believe there was an involvement with the Battle of the Bulge. Again, we don't know with certainty, and we have never heard the full story. What was interesting to me, and I guess it gets back to the sort of personal connection, it was really never spoken about. There was really nothing shared about it. And Ireland, as you probably know from our own history, has had its own share of troubling times over the years, and a lot of that caused people to be quite secretive about what they shared relative to involvement with military, particularly British military, if you were living in the country of Ireland at the time. But there was an involvement there, which has caused me to be really interested in the campaigns of World War II and what actually happened on the continent of Europe that had such a profound impact on the situation across the world.
Yeah, John, you're so right. I know Ken and I have talked about this a lot, and it seems like every guest that we have, right, Ken, every single one of them says the same thing. They didn't talk about it very much. If you knew a veteran that was a family member, that family member didn't talk about it. And your reaction by your grandmother is just another case of them not wanting to talk about it.
Right, right.
Well, like us, you were also drawn into the Band of Brothers, that powerful HBO miniseries that brings to life the real story of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Easy Company, and their journey from the brutal training grounds of Georgia's Camp Toccoa through Europe to Hitler's Eagle's Nest. And Ken, you were also taken by the Band of Brothers so much that when you're in Europe retracing the steps of our father over there, you had to make a point to see as many of those spots as you could, right?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. I've always been a huge fan of the Band of Brothers series. I probably watched it 7 or 8 times easily. Just fell in love with it, going all the way back to 2000. I didn't have HBO and went over to a neighbor's house to watch it because he did, and I was just enthralled with it, and that's really got what got me thinking about Dad's service as well. But when I was in Europe in 2023, tracing Dad's footsteps, we were able to get to some of the areas that the Band of Brothers Easy Company was at. So I made it a point to try to get to a few of those areas and really see what the terrain looked like and what the towns looked like. And I wanted to really experience a little bit about what they saw, even though Dad wasn't really in those areas at the same time they were.
Yeah, and of course, John, you recently took it even a step further because just this past May, you and your son went on the official Stephen Ambrose Band of Brothers tour. Over 2 weeks traveling from the States to England, France, Holland, Belgium, and Germany, literally walking where Easy Company did. So, guys, here today, I think what we should do is go through the Band of Brothers episodes one by one, using it as a guide to talk about the places that you both saw. We'll dive deeper into those real places that John visited, as well as those that Ken saw, and share what it was like to stand in those spots, and also compare what you guys saw or didn't see. So, John, let's start with you. What made you and your son decide to go on this incredible journey together?
Well, like Ken, my son and I were both big fans of the show. I think for lots of reasons. It was engaging, very well put together, very well produced, uh, viscerally sort of showed what life was like for EV Company. So we're big fans when the show came out. Then I just learned almost, accidentally that such a thing existed as a Band of Brothers tour, that you could actually book time, be taken on a curated tour, guided tour of many of the sites around Europe that the Band of Brothers or the EV Company visited through their campaign, which I thought that'd be an interesting thing to do at some point of time in the future. And then as we started to research that a bit more, I learned of what people describe to me as the version that you have to do if you're going to do this, which is the Stephen Ambrose historical tour. Because we learned that it was Stephen Ambrose's own family that helped to put together the tour and involved veterans from Easy Company, including Major Winters, to actually construct the tour, the locations, the places to see, the stories to tell, and to really walk it as a tour that more than shows you the sights, helps you relive the history, which was music to my ears, getting to understand the people behind the story, getting to understand the experiences behind the events. And so the tour was constructed in that way, and it was highly recommended to me. I can tell you, the experience exceeded expectations on every level. We're still, and it was in May, my 28-year-old son Dennis, who traveled with me, we're still thinking and reminding ourselves of the magnitude of things we saw. Like, oh yes, do you remember looking at pictures we took and saying, that's right, we were there. And not surprisingly, and this is, I think they deserve the recognition. Stephen Ambrose, the tour company, just recently received the Historical Tourism Company of the Year from Education Insider magazine. And I'm not surprised because, as I said, this is a tour that for us exceeded expectation. It is incredibly immersive. And for me, like a once in a lifetime experience to do something of this nature that brought the entirety of EV Company's experience to life in a way that we genuinely feel we've walked in their shoes, which is like really, really exciting and very, very insightful.
You also make a very good point, John, because you are saying how accurate it needs to be and how important it is. And reminds me of something that I read about the producers, Tom Hanks being one of them. They gave the actors portraying these great men freedom to work with these guys in the fact that they would go to their soldier that they're representing, and the soldier would say, I wasn't there in this scene. And the actors could take themselves out of that scene. And
Yeah.
the directors and the producers wouldn't get upset. They took themselves out just to make it more and more accurate. So yeah, it's incredible. So let's get to it. Let's take those first steps, like you said, John, in Easy's boots with the first episode, Currahee, which is focused on the training camp there at Toccoa, and of course, running up Currahee Hill. What did you see there, John, and what can you share with us?
Yeah, so we started the tour in Atlanta, in Georgia, at the Toccoa train station. So if you think about the tour being truly the bookends, we started on the platform of the train station in Toccoa, and we ended at the field in Kaprun in Austria, where the final Easy Company group photograph was taken. So literally bookended the entirety of their campaign. And so in Toccoa, we also visited the museum. There's a wonderful museum in the train station that is really a gathering of a lot of artifacts of the original time of the training. They also have some unique exhibits there, well worth the visit. They have one of the stables that the Easy Company were billeted in Aldbourne, deconstructed in Aldbourne, shipped to Toccoa and rebuilt in the museum. It's there. And so you can walk into the quarters that they stayed in where the bunks were. And it is one of the buildings. It's the only one left, actually. And it sits in the museum. So we had a wonderful time, and there's a lot to see there, a lot of artifacts, that Easy Company left behind, and that lot that the 101st left behind as they trained in Toccoa in the camp. But then we visited the camp itself, and it still exists, very small subset of the original acreage that was there. So you enter through the gates, still the same as they were. There are some of the quarters that they lived in still there, the initial ground, but of course it's much smaller than the large acreage that was the training area and conditioning area and assault courses that were there before. That's all been replaced over the years, acquired and used for other purposes. But we got to be in the camp, and then from there look at the mighty Currahee Mountain sitting right beside it, and that hill. 3 miles up, 3 miles down. We got to travel. We did not run up the hill. I have to say, we traveled up by coach. And not everybody on the tour was willing, or I think would have wanted to spend the time running up and down. We were game for it, but it wasn't to happen. But we went to the top.
You didn't have spaghetti before you did that, did you?
No, we didn't. There were plenty of jokes though amongst the group. That is this where they feed us the spaghetti before we go? But we got to go to the top, and we got to touch the you see in the show. And it's there. There's the point at the top of it where you're actually at the pinnacle, at the summit, and the views of it from there are phenomenal, actually.
So, John, tell me about the road. It's probably changed in 80 years, but in the series, it looks very rutted and hard to run on. Is it in much better shape?
It's in much better shape. It's paved now. It's used daily by people visiting the area, and I think even locals as a training area. That there were people hiking, there were people running.
Sure.
Certainly in the show it's depicted, and I think that's the way it was, because it's described in lots of the memoirs that way too, that it was full of ruts and rough rock, and it was pretty hard going to cover that ground, but it's not like that now.
Yeah, I think I saw some antennas, like TV antennas or radio antennas on the top of that.
Yeah, they're up at the top.
Yeah, so they have to get that up there pretty smoothly. That's so cool. Oh gosh. All right. So should we move on to episode 2? This is all great stuff. And of course, episode 2 is called Day of Days, and this one opens up right on, they're in the C-47 Sky trains, just getting beat to crap in there. And Ken and I had the opportunity to go see the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and see that huge C-47 Skytrain hanging in the lobby there, and it's just so massive. It was so amazing. What were you able to see any of those, or were they?
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me. We know in Toccoa, in the camp, there's just inside the gate a C-47. It's actually in the process of being restored, but because it's sitting there and it's in the process of being restored, we were able to go in. So we went in. We're inside in the fuselage. When you consider that 18 guys went into battle this way, and when you see the size of it, it's just, there's no replacing it. You see pictures of these things and you think, okay, fair enough. When you're sitting inside it or standing inside in what is a small box or a small tube, and you realize you've 18 guys here heading out together, going into an unknown or uncertain future in something that is, all that's protecting you from the elements is there's a very thin fuselage around. Pretty amazing. So we got to do that right at the start. So yes, it's just continued to build on this experience of we're going to live through a lot of the experiences that they shared.
And Ken, this is your thing, because when we're at the museum, we were wishing that we could go inside these large planes or these Jeeps or these, deuce and a half, right?
Yeah, when we were there, again, hats off to Stephen Ambrose for getting that National World War II Museum started. What a great facility it is. But yeah, they had that plane hanging there, and I said to you, Chris, I said, man, I'd love to go inside there and feel what that's like. And John, you did a good job describing it as I would imagine it. You don't feel very safe in there. You've got all this flak going off around you. You're in tight quarters, and the noise and the wind had to just be incredible for those guys.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, and so we saw in the many other locations we visited, there are museums in many of them, and they have, restored tanks and armored trucks and things. We didn't get to enter any of them like the War Museum. You just don't, and it's totally understandable. This was one of those unique things that happened because they happened to have it there, and they're working on it and they were happy to leave us have some time.
That's great that you had that nice honor. So also in this episode, of course, we're talking about them on D-Day, and they didn't make it to Normandy, but I know, Ken, you were able to go by Normandy, and I think, John, you did as well. Ken, what was your experience when you went to Normandy? What'd you see there?
Yeah, I made it a point to get to Omaha Beach just because that's such hallowed ground, and to walk through that cemetery, and there's so much reverence there. And at the time I was there it was in May of 2023. There were French high school teachers that brought their students and had notebooks where they were talking about an American soldier's life and death on that beach, what their life at home was, and how they what branch they were in, and how they died on the beach. And it really did my heart good to realize that the French remember the sacrifice that was made by our men. So I was really glad to see that beach. And Easy Company's mission was to come in and help suppress the fire on that beach. And you got to see that firsthand, John, what they
Yeah,
did.
that's right. Yeah, it was a so we did like that. We were spent time in Aalborg, and then we traveled, over by ferry over into Normandy and saw the beaches as we approached them. And we were blessed on this tour in the quality of the guidance that we were receiving. So not only were we experiencing, we were hearing all of the stories. And you remember, as I said, this was crafted largely by Stephen Ambrose
Mm,
with the veterans. So the stories that were being relayed are the stories that they chose to be relayed at these points in the tour.
mm.
So it's almost like we had them with us, and we had an incredible historian, Matt Brogy, who traveled the entire trip with us and was sharing these stories as we went through. But then when we arrived, we went to the locations where Easy Company had dropped in ahead of time. So as you probably remember, the intent was to be in behind enemy lines to help to ensure the causeways and the passageways were cleared for the pending invasion through the beaches. And so, yes, we visited the beaches as well, and like you, felt them to be almost a surreal experience to stand on the sand and look at the landscape. And real for me, the big, I think, impact it had was the distance. I think when I see these things in movies or representations, you have this sense of distance, which it's not as real. Like you're not far from the edge of the beach, and
Right.
you can see where the gun emplacements were, and you were at the mercy of this carnage. And so it must have been like terrifying experience to come out of the landing craft and onto the water. But we went to the locations where the original drop zones were as they moved in to try to take control of St. Maria Glees and to take control of the causeways and the access points to and from the beaches. And again, relived the stories of what was experienced as they came down, because of course many of them were distributed into the locations that were outside of the intended landing zone and were now under cover of darkness in the super early part of the morning of June 6th, trying to find themselves and regroup as a company to carry out the mission that they had been set.
Yeah, you're speaking of course, episode two here, and a big part of that is Breakor Manor, and where they actually, kind of they landed and then they regrouped and they decided that they got to take care of these 88s, I believe, that were,
That's right.
positioned to fire right down on our guys arriving on the beach. Were you able to
Yeah.
stop by that area?
Yeah, we were, and it was one of the unique elements I think of the tour was how much access we gained. So we went to visit Le Grand Chemin first, which was where they set up base, and then from there, Dick Winters, had moved out to understand how he could complete the mission of really immobilizing what you just said, the German guns that were set up at Breakort Manor. And so we traced we have it's a private farm today. Breakort Manor is a private farm. It's not open to the public, but we did get access to it. And so we walked the tree line from Le Grand Chemin into the fields and where the gun emplacements were based in the hedgerow. And hedgerows, of course, as you know, played a huge role in this entire campaign. And the hedgerow placements they're still there today. You can see where the gun was, where the clearance had been made, and where they were positioned around the field. The four guns, three on one side, one on the other, and the tree line behind them, protecting them with all the machine guns.
John, were the trenches still there that they show in the series? It looked like there were
They're
man-made
still there.
trenches behind that tree line.
Yeah, they're still there. I mean, it is like a drain trench, but it's still there, and so you
Mhm.
can what they would have passed through, I think, is still intact.
That's so cool. And of
Yeah.
course, this episode features the introduction to Lieutenant Spears. And I have to tell you guys, I know we're not really talking about all the guys in here, and we're talking about more of the locations. but he turns out to be one of my favorite guys, right? He starts off with this questionable act that he maybe did or didn't do, but then he explains it later on. But then to see him step up when was it Lieutenant Dyke? Is that who that they kind of he replaced and
Yes.
on that mission and what he did there and his interactions with Lipton and just he became my favorite guy. So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah,
his introduction, and you're speaking about those guns. He took out the fourth gun by himself. So
Right.
yeah,
quite a soldier
yeah,
there. All
yeah.
right, so we should move on probably to Carrington, which is the episode three. And before we get into where you were, John, I know Ken, you spent some time here. You were able to see this space, right?
Yeah, we did stop there after we went to Omaha Beach. We were, I talked to my wife. I said, okay, I've done enough World War II stuff. Let's go see some of the chateaus you want to see in the Loire Valley. So that Carentan was right on our way. And so I said, we got to stop at Carentan because that's one of my favorite episodes in the series. And so, John, I want you to describe it. But one of the things that I would like to understand is that approach into the town of Carentan was kind of up that dirt road and the machine gun opens up on them. Were you able to see that? And then what did you actually see once you got inside the village? Because I want to compare that to what I saw when I was there visiting.
Yeah, when we did it, we actually walked the road. We were sort of a little bit wary of the traffic, but we walked the road to get a sense. If you might remember, as you approach, there's that undulation in the surface of the street or in the roadway, which is depicted very accurately in the show that you're kind of undercover even on the road. And
Yeah.
actually, it's pretty much like that. As you look down into Carrington, you are pretty much covered by the rise and fall of the road. So there's an undulation there or a sloping. And
Hmm.
so we started at that position and then we worked down into the town itself. And, the area where the guys ran in when the machine guns opened fire and
Yeah.
jumped into the trench at the side of the road, we stood there, felt what it would have been like to be that close to where the machine gun was set up, in the window of the building. And of course, as we saw on the show, kind of almost reenacted the Dick Winters pulling the guys out and sending them on down. But
Yeah.
we saw that and we walked back down. We saw the windows, which are honestly a lot of our kind of commentary as we were experiencing these locations was, hey, they could have filmed this stuff on location because
Yeah.
the what they portray in the show is 100% the same as what you see physically, but they didn't film them there. They just
Right.
they recreated it.
Yeah, I had mentioned to Chris when I was in Carentan, I took some pictures of some archways that were in the town that they replicated so perfectly in the series. And it's the
Yes.
scene where I can't remember his name. Anyway, he says, "Is it okay if we move the wounded now?" And they're kind of underneath these little archways in this portico. And Dick Winters looks at Nixon like, that's kind of weird. And like, yeah, go ahead and move them. And then that's when
He
Winters
gets
gets
shot.
that ricochet in the
That's
ankle. And
right.
and and so those arches that those are in Carentan. They just did such a good job replicating that.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. There was another story in Carrington which struck with me, and it isn't so much a 506th story, but it's a 101st. And it's in a place called Angoville Au Plan. It was a church. And I don't know if you saw this, Ken, but there was a church there that two medics who dropped with the 101st, they set up an aid station there. And so initially the church was, American forces controlled, Allied forces controlled, so they
Right.
set up an aid station. And they were treating the wounded in there. There were two guys, Bob Wright and Kenneth Moore. And so they're in this church, and during the battle, it changes sort of control from American to German because the fighting's happening right outside. It's
Yeah.
literally on the outskirts of Carrington. And so as the changeover in control is occurring, so the US forces are saying, hey, you guys, you got to get out. We got to retreat. But the two medics said, no, we're not going to leave. We're going to continue to treat these wounded. We're not leaving. And so the Germans took control, and the German officers came into the church. And we were in the church. We visited this. We saw what this firsthand. And the Germans officers said, okay, you guys are prisoners of war. You're coming with us. And again, the two medics said, no, we're not leaving. We're treating. And they started to treat German injured as well as US injured in
Yeah.
the church. And they continued to do that. And over the passage of time, control slipped came back to the US again. And so these guys were back in, on their own side and lived through the entire war and lived beyond it. But their story is phenomenal. Like they stood, I
Yeah.
mean, these are young
Yeah.
guys they're memorialized in the church, and the blood of the wounded they were treating is still infused into the wooden pews. You can see it.
Amazing.
Like you
Yeah,
Amazing.
saw, and we saw that.
yeah, of course. I've seen some of those Instagram reels that have shown that, and it's incredible. And what an amazing story, the dedication of medics and doctors during that. And we'll talk a little bit about Doc coming up in the Bastogne episode, but
Yeah,
the men that served like that were extremely dedicated, and it doesn't change how I feel about this at all. You would, of course, assume that those guys would stay and do their job no matter what country or who they're patching up. And we get to see a little bit of that towards the end of the Band of Brothers series as well, when the German
that's right.
doctor works on the officer with the not the officer, but the guy with the head injury. Ken, you going to say something?
Yeah, so we did spend a whole day in Carentan, and John, I think the church you're referring to is not the cathedral, though, right? It's a
No,
smaller church in
it's
town.
smaller. That's right.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
because I
and
went
it's
in the cathedral's beautiful, and we did go in there, but I didn't see this other church in town, so I'll have to look at a map and see where that location was.
yeah, it's outside. It's Carrington, but just outside. It's outside the center of the town. There was another interesting story related with the same church. That a shell came through the roof while they were in there, and the hole's still in the roof. It's been patched, but you can see exactly where it was.
Wow.
The shell came through while they were still treating the wounded, and the shell hit the ground, broke the tile, the flag or stone tile, and again you can still see that. You can see literally where it fell and broke it, but the shell didn't explode while they were
Oh,
in
wow.
there. So,
Wow.
we all of us I saw, took pause while we were in there and saying, "Oh, that's pretty extraordinary that they survived what they did, doing what they were doing, and this occurred as well in this church, and they survived that."
You have to think that maybe that shell didn't go off because whoever decides if shells go off or not, what
Right,
duds are and what are, was going,
right.
these guys are saving lives, doesn't matter
Yeah,
what side. So that's not going to happen. That's not going to
I
happen.
agree. I
And then, of
agree.
course, this episode closes with something I think was really touching to me. And really, at first, this is all exciting and Band of Brothers, and I love this. And it comes to the point where Malarkey is picking up the laundry for himself and then realizes, she's like, can you take these? Can you take these? And those are the fallen soldiers that are either been
Yeah.
injured or killed. And that's like, oh, wait a minute. This is real life. This is,
That's right.
this is
And that's
devastating.
back in Aldbourne. We saw that too, as we were, as I said, we visited Little Coat House. We also spent time in Aldbourne, and that's right in the center of the village. And we saw the building. You pointed it
Mhm.
out to us and said that's where the laundry was based.
Wow.
That's incredible. All right, so now we're on to, I think, the most moving episode for Ken and I because it's named Replacements, which is episode 4. And of course, this means so much because our dad was a replacement soldier as well. And like the beginning of each episode, we get to hear from the real soldiers of Easy Company talking
Yeah,
about what's going on, right? And they talk about the replacements, and they were worried about them. I think even one of them says, we just try to keep these guys alive. They're so green. And they
yeah,
mentioned how they were together for 2 years, of course, starting in Camp Toccoa all the way through Normandy. And they've been together for 2 years. And it just struck me so much because our dad was a replacement soldier with the 99th Infantry Battalion, right? Which was a Norwegian, American infantry group. And they trained in Camp Ripley in Minnesota and then Camp Hill in Colorado for 2 years before our dad, joined them. And it really struck me that, this is the same kind of thing. I mean, do you
yeah,
feel that same way, Ken?
Yeah, the Easy Company guys talk about how they didn't want to get to know the replacements because they weren't as well trained and they didn't want to see him die, basically. And it's really touching when we think about Dad being, an 18-year-old traveling from Pittsburgh, doing his training, crossing the ocean, landing in Liverpool, and then being at the 10th Replacement Depot, and then finally getting called up to join the 99th Infantry Battalion separate, which is the Norwegian American troops. And he's a 5'7" Italian guy, gets thrown in with these guys and has to, demonstrate that his medal that he can hang with them, which he does eventually. But yeah, that episode about replacements really does touch my heart because we know Dad went through that.
Yeah, and of course it starts off, in early September, and then, really is a big part of the episode is when Operation Market Garden starts, and that's like around September 17th. So before we get to where Easy was, Ken, do you recall where Dad was around the same time?
Yeah, so I believe that Dad completed additional training in England, became a sharpshooter, and then he was shipped off around the very end of August, and he would have seen his first action right around the time Market Garden took place. The 99th Infantry Battalion separate was in Maastricht, Netherlands, and attacking what they call the canal drive along the canals there, just at the same time Market Garden was kicking off.
Hmm.
So that seems appropriate because wasn't Operation Market Garden also in Eindhoven in Holland? So what did you experience, John?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to visit actually all of the locations. I mean, if you think of Market Garden was the Montgomery kind of inspired
Mhm.
attack or campaign. There were three components to it: the 101st going into Eindhoven area, the 82nd going into Nijmegen, I think it's the pronunciation, and then the British first to Arnhem. So, and of course, we've seen these, The Bridge Too Far, and we've, lots of different dramatizations through movies of the different elements of that campaign. And we had the opportunity to visit elements of all of three because they deliberately wanted to give us an experience that opened it up a little bit beyond just the 506 and the 101st. They said, look, there were a lot of other, entities involved. You just talked about your dad's experience as well, and said we ought to sort of kind of pay homage, I guess, in some ways, to all of the other elements of these campaigns. So when we had opportunity to do that, we did that too. And so we visited those locations. There are two kind of real abiding memories from this whole section for me. The first was visiting the drop zone where the airborne guys came in. And it's in a farm, again, an active farm. Like we had the experience in France, we got access to some private locations where the folks have a relationship with the David Ambrose tour to allow people to come in and visit it. So we visited the location, physically walked onto the field where these guys had dropped en masse, the gliders had, the paratroopers had, and we met with the family who are the descendants of the owners who were there at the time. In fact, the youngest son who was there at the time was the elder of the family who was there the day we visited. So they had a picture of the family out, and he's the younger guy standing in front, and he was there himself, and his grandson did a lot of the translating or interpreting for us, and just he shared some of his experience of having been there at that time when all of these guys came in, essentially liberating Eindhoven for them initially, as part
Yeah.
of the first phase of Market Garden.
It also is kind of interesting where Winters says to them, yeah, just German, just the grandfathers and young kids fighting here, It's like, yeah, not
Yeah,
really. And
yeah.
and then of course they go, it seemed like they in the episode, it seems like they didn't have to fight too hard to get to Eindhoven. And liberate them. And of course, we see the women getting their heads shaved and all that kind of stuff. But then,
That's
like
right.
you said, they go to outskirts a little bit and they run into, which I would assume would be the farmer with the young kid. And I think maybe, is it Webster that gives him the
Gives them the
chocolate?
chocolate bar, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
that was
yeah.
extremely moving. But I get so upset, guys, when I watch this episode. Every time I watch this episode, and John, as an Irishman, you could probably appreciate this. The darn British. My goodness, could you fire your tank guns at the tank right behind the barn? It's
I,
there.
I, I
Please take care
know.
of it. Just,
I know. We had some
oh,
we had some really interesting, I guess, kind of discussions in that part of the tour about what was going on here that was causing. And hey, hindsight, we can all have opinions on what might or might not have, but there was definitely something very unusual, it seems, about the lack of coordination, where if this could, we might have had a different outcome if things worked out differently or if they were handled differently. But yeah, I have the same reaction to it. It's sort of like this. But the other thing we did, though, before we move off Market Garden, we also visited where the 82nd, most of their campaign occurred. And there's an area where they cross the river as part of the Nijmegen, and they're crossing, they lost about 40, they lost 48 of the troops crossing under fire. And a bridge has been built there. Oversteek Bridge has been built there. A new bridge, only built in 2013. But every night since then, they commemorate the loss of those soldiers. So there's a sunset march. Now, this wasn't officially part of the tour, but it happens every night. At sunset, a mostly Dutch veteran, not always Dutch, but mostly, helps to march or leads a march across the bridge. And as you're crossing the bridge, each pair of what is 48 lights comes on as you pass them.
oh, so cool.
Happens every night. And so, being the kind of traditional tour group that we were, we decided we have to do the walk. So we organized it ourselves. It became part of our tour experience to go and do the walk that night at sunset, which was a very moving experience for everybody there. In fact, I would say not a dry eye on the bridge amongst the entire 27 of us on tour together. And it was just that you, as you walked across it, as each set of lights turned on, this is the soul. Like you're basically experiencing each soul that was extinguished crossing that river as part of the 80 seconds, campaign in as part of Market Garden. And so just I think it added yet another dimension to what it is we were experiencing.
Yeah, you make such a good point because it's always back to being grounded in the realism, you know. Ken and I and romanticize is not the right word, but sometimes we romanticize this war and
I know.
what we saw and just that just brings it home again. And it's so important to do that. Now, you said you were able to go across. Can anybody do that, or do you have to sign
Yes.
up? How does that work?
Yeah, no, you just show up. It's a sunset, and depending on when sunsets are going to occur, on that particular day, you're just a couple of minutes beforehand, and off they go. And it's beautiful because it literally is at that dusk, so the lights become brighter as you're going across, and then they stay burning for the night. But they do it every single night, regardless of the weather, 365 days a year, which brings me to another point, actually, and I didn't mention this already. Of course, as part of visiting the locations, we visited all of the US or the American cemeteries
Oh,
in each
yes.
location, whether at Normandy Beach,
Hmm.
the Netherlands Cemetery, the one in Luxembourg where Patton is buried,
Hmm.
um, General Patton. Those in of themselves are, I think, they're sort of, you said it like it's kind of they have this impact on you. Just the sheer magnitude of the numbers of crosses that you see, or of the number of you know soldiers who are buried there, and the sheer magnitude of it. It was always this sobering. This is what's happening. Like you're
Yes.
following the campaign, hearing the stories of bravery, of which they are, hearing the heroism, hearing some of the incredibly difficult, traumatic events that occurred, and then this was the cost. One of the other guests, and we were very fortunate. We had a lot of U.S. military vets on the tour with us,
Ooh.
so it brought another dimension to it all. And one of them said, guys, look around. Freedom isn't free,"
Yeah.
and
So
it just kind
true.
of really brought it home. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because, Ken was able to have some assistance on his tour of Europe by a German national that helped him. And he has some attachment to, what is it, Henri Chapelle Cemetery.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story again?
Yeah, this guy's a World War II reenactor, and he reenacts, an American soldier, and he's so dedicated to his craft and the reverence for the war that he takes care of six American graves at the Henri Chapelle cemetery in Belgium. So that just blew me away that the Europeans have not forgotten the sacrifice that was made to
No.
really rescue their country from fascism.
Yeah, and it's actually, yeah, I agree with you, by the way, Ken, and that's very striking. But also in the American cemetery in the Netherlands, the graves have all been adopted by individual families
Hmm.
for their upkeep and maintenance.
Hmm.
And we found this like extraordinary because it's so important to them that in some cases families will that they will
Oh,
pass
neat.
that on as part of their estate. So
Yeah.
they value the responsibility so deeply. And it's what you said, it's a recognition and a remembrance of how much sacrifice was made on their behalf.
80
Yeah,
years, 80 years past.
yeah, absolutely. And you're so right because I wish Americans did a little bit more job of honoring that. Than, it seems like the Europeans, appreciate what we did there a little bit more than we appreciate it back home. But of
Mm.
course, Ken, we were able to go out and see, visit Dad, of course, at the Fort Logan National Cemetery there in Colorado, where he's interned. And you make a good point. You like to go out in Christmas time
Yeah.
and see it because it's moving because Dad was in the Battle of the Bulge at Christmas, right?
Right. Yeah. I love going out there. It's striking. It makes you really respect that freedom isn't free. And it goes through a lot of wars, not just World War II. There's a lot of veterans buried out there. But you walk those hallowed grounds and you realize the sacrifice that these men and women have made for our freedom, and it gives you pause for thought.
It does.
Absolutely does. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to the next episode, which is Crossroads. And of course, this is the episode that Dick Winters, recalls he has to shoot the young SS soldier. So that's what this episode is all about. And that starts around October 5th, 1944. So, Ken, before I go to John to get his opinion on that, where was Dad around October 5th? Do you remember?
Yeah, he would have just come off the lines from the Canal Drive, which was in relation to the Market Garden push at the same time. They were relieved for a short period of time, and they went to Montzen, Montzn, Belgium, to rest up and refit and get ready for the next period of action at that point in time before they were called up to Versalen and the Aachen campaign.
Yeah, so it's I always like try to think of, where Dad was in relationship to Easy when I'm watching the Band of Brothers. So John, what was your experience in that Crossroads area? I think you might have even seen where Dick Winters was running down that
We
berm, if
did.
you will. Yeah, tell me about
Yeah,
that.
in the hedgerow where were set up and where Winters ran forward, sent out the color which was intended to bring as a signal, the red, to bring the others with him. And story has it that they just didn't see it in time, so they didn't follow him. So he ended up running on his own. Some of the participants, my son included, ran that field. They went all the way to the hedgerow and ran the same, you know, whatever it is, 150 yards or so that Dick Winters ran as well. So they actually experienced it all the way to the road where this German SS soldier turned up, or
Yes.
was present to him and got shot. And again, it's a sense of distance thing. It's like you tend to think that he ran up and he was somewhere in the distance. This road is not wide at all. And so we experienced it firsthand exactly where it had occurred.
John, you make a good point that your son, who was, I think, in his late 20s, right, did that run.
28, yeah.
Yeah, it's a young man's game to do that run again, not for us guys, but how old was Dick Winters? Do we know? Was he in his early 20s when he was doing all these amazing things? Because for me, this episode seems to be his coming out party. This is where he shows his muster, right? This is where he shows his intelligence
Yeah,
and as well as his toughness. Like he's out there by himself. I mean, he takes care of this stuff, and he's still at the end of the episode really upset. And Nixon tries to console him. So, do you remember how
yeah.
old he was? Anybody have that?
I
My
don't
guess
remember.
is he was like 25, maybe. He was a
Yeah,
little older than some of the guys, but not a lot. I would say 24, 25, maybe.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
absolutely crazy. So, also in this episode, we have Operation Pegasus, which is when the soldiers, our Easy Company guys, went across the river to help rescue the British Red Devils. And that is around October 23rd of 1944. So, shortly
that's right.
after that, right? So, were you able to see any of that area?
We visited It was just near a town called Rankin, where we visited the area and saw where the crossing had occurred. The crossing is not as wide as it was when they did it. Actually,
Okay.
through the passage of time and development, it's actually narrower now because they've reclaimed some of the land. And when you just consider how they were trying to do this with sort of rubber dinghies, paddling with rifles, I mean, in that expanse of ground under the threat of attack, it's so we did see that piece of we saw where it happened.
Yeah. So, this episode ends. In a way that also touched my heart and also really reinforced what was to come. They get called up to the Battle of the Bulge in Bastogne, and you see them, of course, they're walking, to it, and the guys coming off that line are just devastated, and they're trying to get the ammo, and they're just it's just like you can see it in the guys walking off the line how bad it was, and our guys don't really know yet. Yes, they know that they're going in with not enough ammo, with not winter gear, and they're
Right.
you know they're worried about that. But and Ken, just to give us some perspective, where was Dad around the same time?
Yeah, so Dad had just finished fighting in the Aachen area in the town of Versalen, and then they moved off to Tilf, Belgium, which is just outside of Liège, Belgium, and they're pretty relaxed at that point, and they get a very brief notice to just grab their paraphernalia, that they need to fight with and leave their personal belongings behind and get on the deuce and a halves. And they trucked them from Tilf over to Malmedy, which is the northern edge of the Battle of the Bulge and is only about 40 to 45 miles as the crow flies from Bastogne. So with the tour, John, where do they start you guys in on the whole Battle of the Bulge experience?
We did actually. We covered almost all of the main components of it. We visited Bastogne
Okay.
itself, obviously, and spent time seeing the buildings that were. I mean, a lot of damage was done there, but maybe as one of the really important sites was the church that had become the aid station,
Hmm.
where we see the story of Renee and Augusta, the two nurses, and all of that went on there. We visited that. We visited the town, and then we were taken out to the forest where actually Easy Company spent most of their time, Bojac and the area on the outskirts. And that was quite incredible because like other parts of the tour, we as we went through the forest, the foxholes, the remnants of the foxholes that they dug are still there. And one of the ones that we sort of challenged ourselves to find was the foxhole that Major Winters had used, which isn't marked, not well known, but based on, a lot of the support the historian Matt was providing was like, hey, here's reconnaissance photography of the time. Here's satellite imagery today. We were doing the compares and contrast and pretty much localized where we thought they should be. And my son and some of the others believe they found Major Winter's foxhole in the hedgerow, in the in
So
the in the undergrowth.
so
But
John,
the
it would have
foxholes are
been
still there.
yeah, so it would have been back from the front lines because he was a
Yes.
commander, but still within
Oh,
range of getting hit by artillery.
oh yeah. What struck me about being in the forest, because you see it depicted in the show, was that like how vulnerable these guys were.
Hmm.
I mean, you were dug in a foxhole, but it offered very little protection, and the artillery was shooting the tops of the trees deliberately,
Right.
so that it would splinter out, and you had all the falling,
Shrapnel.
shrapnel from the
Yeah.
shell, but also shrapnel from the wood, from the timber, and they're sitting underneath. It's raining down on them, like day after day, night after night, in the growing cold of
Yes.
the onset of winter. It must have been, well, it was, but the most miserable experience you could endure.
And we talked a lot about this is episode 6 of the Band of Brothers Bastogne, how it's really focused on Doc, the medic, and what he's going through. And I think it was an interesting way of telling the story of what those guys were going through there and how he's
Yeah,
going back to the aid station and meeting Renee. And then, of course,
yeah, Augusta.
yeah.
Yeah,
And you told me, I think, when we were talking before, that she ended up living their whole life
yeah. She's
there.
buried there. Both of their graves are in Bastogne. We visited both, where Renee is interred and where Augusta is interred. And she died in 2015, Augusta.
Wow.
And she one of the stories that kind of stuck with me or commentaries was that she's almost like the lost angel of Bastogne because her story was kind of lost to history. We even
Right.
remember Renee, and of course she was dramatized more significantly in Band of Brothers, the show, so it sort of raised the profile. But Augusta, she lived out her life there and died in 2015.
And John, you visited the church that was the aid station while you were there,
Yes,
and in the series, it's shelled quite heavily. So
yeah.
describe that church for us and what you learned about that.
Well, of course, like a lot of them, it's restored now, and but uh, we visited it, and they have a memorial to Renee there, and the 101st, because of what they experienced there, and it's just like a lot happened in a lot of these towns. It was the location that was chosen as the aid station because it had the room and the space, and
Hmm.
also I think central location within the towns was a big part of what made them aid stations as well.
Hmm.
But it's there today to visit. It's mostly restored and repaired.
That's incredible. And, we're talking about Doc and being a medic, and Dad's unit, the 99th Infantry Battalion, separate, had a doctor assigned to it that had a big role during that time too. Ken, you want to share a little bit of that?
Yeah, Dr. Mingi was assigned, he was a Norwegian American. He was assigned to the 99th Infantry Battalion and was served with them throughout the whole campaign. And he was in Malmedy when the Malmedy massacre occurred. He was
Mm,
one of the first soldiers with Dad's group, the 99th Infantry Battalion, to arrive in Malmedy. And there's a story of one soldier who survives the Malmedy massacre, crawls his way back towards the town of Malmedy and is picked up by some U.S. soldiers, and they bring him to Dr. Mingy, and Dr. Mingy renders aid to him, and this man survives, and he helps tell the story of what took place so that the war crimes councils would have a eyewitness account of what took place.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible because Bagnères is where actually the Malmedy massacre took place, right? And it's not close. I mean, it's close in terms of us driving, but
Yeah.
it's not close to Malmedy, so we don't know how far that soldier had to crawl to get aid. And Dr. Mingy, who was in Company C with Dad, gave him aid, and it's just a really kind of cool link to all of this. Now, the next episode continues with the Battle of the Bulge, but we're talking more about Foy here. And I know, Ken, before we talk about where John was, tell us your experience with Foy.
Yeah, so John, I'm sure you were thrilled to be in that area, that Battle of the Bulge. There's two great episodes in Band of Brothers about that. So we spent some time there, and we were in a camper van, and we stayed at a place called the Peace Woods in English. I don't know if you guys passed by there or not, but it's a memorial forest just outside the Bois Jacques that you can visit. We camped there, and we're driving in. We wanted to see Foy, and we're following Google Maps, and we come right up upon the Easy Company marker that has a Muck and Pincala's names on it. I'm sure you visited it. We came
Yep.
right upon that. We didn't have access to the forest to look at the foxholes, but we could see some from that memorial. And then we drove on into Foy and parked and got out and started to walk around. And I was always enamored with Shifty's story, and so I really wanted to explore Foy. And when we were there, there were some other folks there that were giving tour guides who shared with me some of the old black and white photos. So I really want to pick your brains about Foy, Shifty's wonderful shot he made on the German sniper, and then things like where the tank was positioned by the Germans, and the small church on that corner, that that they ended up blowing the top off of that thing. 'Cause I think there was a sniper in that as well. So walk me through your Foy experience, because that one was near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and it was similar. We had the same experience. We were walked all the way through the forest to the edge to see, the what the edge of that will look like, and then you
Yeah.
could see the village in the distance or the town in the distance. And
Hmm.
again, as I said before, a sense of perspective. I think there's no substitute from standing there and going, "That's where that was,"
Yeah.
or "That's where the line of, German artillery were set up," or "This is." So we saw that, and we saw the relative distance as you were going to move towards the town, what ground had to be covered under, in a lot of cases, pretty exposed to advance on it. And so then within Foy, like you, we had the building pointed out to us where the sniper was, and the likely position that Shifty was standing in when he took
Mhm.
that shot, exactly where he would have been, what he saw.
Right.
Yeah, before you go, Ken, it reminds me of when we talked about this in a previous episode. Share with us what you saw, Ken, when you were there.
Yeah, so luckily were able to meet some people that gave us a little bit of guidance, and I'd done some research before I went. And John, you walked this same ground. There's a building kind of on the corner towards the Bois Jacques, towards the woods back there, where Shifty was, and he's facing the German in the building that's near the crossroads, the two
Yeah.
major roads in towns. I say major; they're not very major. It's a small town, and you can really appreciate, as John says, that distance that if Shifty was standing there and took that shot, what an incredible shot it was. But obviously, other people had taken shots there, because there's pockmarks up high where the sniper was, and then down low on the corner,
That's right.
there's a lot of shots there as well. That was fascinating to me. And then to walk down to that intersection where the German tank was, there's a little bit of a depression there next to a building, which I believe now is almost like a small hotel or something like
Yeah,
that.
something
It's the
like that.
same building, and I think it's the same building. The window frames look identical, and that tank was facing up the road towards where Shifty was, and was low enough down that hill that it had good cover, but its gun was just
The
above
turret
the
section.
horizon.
Yes,
Yeah, the
that's
turret was
right.
just above the horizon. So that's what I saw. Tell me if your experience is the same. Then I
Yeah,
also
very
want to
same.
Okay, and then Spears does that where he has to connect with one platoon and the other. Did they talk about where Spears ran when he makes that glorious run?
Yeah, crossing over, open space and going right, and then working back again to where it originated.
I know that Easy Company and I Company attacked from two different sides of the
That's
town
right.
on either side of the main road, so that would make
That's right.
sense.
And
Yeah,
this is a part of the story where Lieutenant Dyke is failing, and Winters is so frustrated. I mean, the whole series, Winters wants to lead his men, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's
he's so
very
good
true.
at it. They keep on moving him back to,
Yeah.
to be and promoting him, but he wants to lead his men, and he can't replace Dyke until it's
In the
too much. I
field.
mean,
Yeah,
and so when he does replace Dyke with Lieutenant Spears, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is when I fell in love with Spears
Yeah.
because he leads the men properly, and then it takes it upon himself to run across and give the information to I Company, and even the guys are like going, "Oh, finally we have a leader. Look at this." They
yeah,
couldn't believe the Germans couldn't believe that. I mean, you see him running right past in the episode, German tanks and such. So, yeah, that was an incredible feat, and I just got to take a pause here real quick because I've done some research and I look at where they would have shot this stuff. It wasn't in these places. They shot everything pretty much in England. And
yeah,
so to be able to recreate what it looks like to you gentlemen is just a testament to how good the soldiers' recollection is, how they trusted the producers, trusted what they were believing, and went and looked at those places to accurately, create the film
reproduce
for him.
them. Yeah, it's
Exactly,
true.
exactly
Absolutely
right.
true. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Did
Sure.
did they move you on to Noville? Did you go to Noville and then Rechamps
we did.
after that?
Yeah.
Okay. And did they tell us what they told you about in Noville? And then the scene I love is when the girls are singing in the choir to them and they're kind of recovering. So did you get to experience some of those things?
We experienced where that occurred,
Okay.
at least what the building that would have occurred in. It was moving to visit the location and realize this was happening under essentially the bombardment that had been occurring like not a couple of miles away.
That's so cool too. And it's one of my favorite scenes with my love affair for Spears, of course, is that, he tells Lipton that Easy Company always had a commander. It was him. He was their
Yeah.
Yeah,
leader. And
yeah,
that was moving to me.
yeah.
It was such a powerful episode.
Hmm.
So moving on, we go to what's called the Last Patrol. This is episode 8, and this is Hagenau, and the river patrol where they have to go over and get German soldiers to interrogate. And this is where Webster returns. So once again, I feel the not the replacement because he wasn't a replacement. I feel how he was not mistreated by the guys in Easy, but he feels like an outsider again, and how much a replacement must have felt as an outsider because Webster comes in and he's very like, yeah, hey guys, how you doing? And he wasn't with them in Bastogne. He wasn't with them during the Battle of the Bulge, and they
Yeah.
kind of shun him a little bit until he proves himself again. So, John, what did you experience in that setting? Were you around there?
Yeah, we visited that as well, and actually we saw several aspects where the buildings that they occupied, set themselves up as a base. We didn't enter any of those buildings; they're privately owned, but we saw them from the street in that area, and then where they lo sort of launched that mission to go and capture, and where we saw what we believe to be the building on the other side, where the grenade was fired in ahead of time, and then unfortunately ran in and caused the injury as part of that campaign. Because the two crosses, you can probably remember, one boat capsized, one got through. We saw exactly where that occurred. Literally stood on the bank of where that would have happened, and then the surrounding area.
I do want to bring up a couple of points, and I failed to say this before, but I really enjoyed, before most of these episodes, Winters narrates the first part, maybe a little bit of Nixon, but when we get to the episode of right before, after Bastogne, which was, the breaking point, and Foy, that's Lipton that narrates that, which was really good, and then Webster narrates this part because it's his perspective of that. And as much as I have love for Spears, and of course, I respect this person, but in the series, I have dislike for Cobb. Cobb is a guy that in the replacements is giving them a hard time, and then of course is told that yeah, you know what, you weren't in Normandy, you shouldn't have that
That's
either.
right.
I
I
was hit.
remember.
I was in the plane when I was in the. So he has to defend himself. And then, of course, in this last patrol episode, he's pretty drunk and complaining about things as well. So Cobb to me was kind of like the anti-hero, even though all these guys are heroes. But anything else to share on that, Ken? What are some of your feelings of this episode, The Last Patrol?
Yeah, it's getting towards the end of the war, and so this is the episode where Winters, in his wisdom, is like, okay, they want to send us on another mission, and I'm sure he wrestled with this in his head, but he decided we're not really going to do it. We're going to tell them we did it because these guys are just wanting more glory, and they're not the ones crossing the river. That really struck home for me.
Yeah, it seems like the first time that really Winters, in a way, disobeyed his orders. He was the perfect soldier. He's smart.
Yeah.
He did what he was told to do. And this one, where his smarts outweighed what he was told to do. And he's like,
Yeah,
this is not worth it. I'm not going to lose my guys because he cared about those guys so
that's right.
much. All right, next up was the episode Why We Fight. Why We Fight, episode 9. And this is when they're moving, of course, deeper into Germany. And then, of course, later on in the episode, they discover the concentration camp. So, John, what is your recollection from this part of the
Yeah,
tour?
yeah. We visited Dachau on the way into Munich. That was the concentration camp that we visited.
Yeah,
I
because they were
didn't.
initially in the one in the episode was Landsberg, but
That's
that one
right.
wasn't happening, right?
We know one of the trades they have to make with these tours, obviously, is logistical. It's like, where are we traveling to anyway? And we were on our way to to Bavaria and then onward into Austria. So this was the more natural sort of path. So, but it was representative of what obviously they saw. And so, as is always the case, and I had visited Auschwitz before, there's something extremely kind of unsettling about visiting these concentration camps. They're largely as they were. Yes, the buildings aren't there, but the the gas chambers are, the crematoriums are. It's like, and then so and it's an experience that I think you does remind you what the price was. Like, this was a campaign, all of it, to maintain freedoms from this experience,
Mhm.
because this is the alternate. And it was my son's first time visiting a concentration camp. I think, definitely left a mark in terms of what it represented. And it's sobering's too light a word for it, but
Yeah.
and it was the same when I visited Auschwitz in Poland. Same experience.
John, you mentioned something that's kind of important that everybody should experience these concentration camps. And not all of us can make that trip to Europe, but the National, Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is
Yeah,
extremely powerful. And I wish you should almost have to go visit those things before lay claim to any,
yeah,
theory that
I
you have
agree.
on the Holocaust and
I
whatnot.
agree.
And Ken, before we get to the things that I know you want to share in this episode, I want to kind of bring up a couple of things that I think were extremely important in this episode and that touched me. I love the storytelling, how Nixon, is introduced to the German woman, the wife of an officer earlier in the episode. And you think that's just a run-in until the end when you see that these people, these Germans, who, of course, the Americans said, how could you not know that this is happening down the road from you? Are, forced, if you want to use that word, to take care of this atrocity and bury, these prisoners that died and it, all that were executed in there. And I think that was very powerful and a great way of telling the story. And then
Yeah,
another thing that kind of touched my heart is how they portrayed Easy Company, which I'm sure was extremely true, that, they discovered this one thing and they think that this is the only one because it was so horrible. And then the realization that there are so many other concentration camps around Europe, and they couldn't believe it. And I think Nixon even tells Winter, there's one that's 10 times as big as the one we saw with ovens and all that kind of stuff. It was crazy. Kim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this hits close to home from our story with the 99th Infantry Battalion separate. Dr. Mingy and a number of the soldiers from Dad's battalion were called into Buchenwald to treat the Holocaust survivors there. And Dr. Mingy was a very good letter writer and wrote a letter home to his wife, and he didn't realize it, but she took it to the local newspaper and they published it. And in it, he describes the atrocities. And he even says in there that there's a town nearby, and he goes, apparently the citizens had no idea what was going on. And it's still up to debate whether they did know or not. But I think that ties in exactly with this episode in Band of Brothers, with how they represent the people in town, and how close they are. How could they not smell it? And in the letter from Dr. Mingy, he talks about how the townspeople said, "Well, all we heard was they were playing these music. We could hear music coming from there. Well, it was to disguise the screams, I'm sure."
Yes. And, I think, and help me if I'm wrong on this, guys, but there was the baker, and I believe Webster, who has kind of been the pacifist during this whole thing, is so upset with him and has gun to him and all that kind of stuff. Because, like he said, you knew, and
Yeah,
he's,
that's right.
and it's just so really kind of turned for Webster because he's always kind of the guy that doesn't want, or he was a writer for crying out loud.
Yeah.
He's the one that really doesn't want to do any of this, and he was the one that was so upset. And that takes us to our final episode, guys. I'm kind of sorry about that because I'm enjoying this conversation so much. But of course, this is the episode named Points. And of course, we find out, that guys are so close to getting their points to get out of here. But it's our final episode of the series. And this is, of course, where the guys go to the Eagle's Nest and, of course, Austria and that kind of stuff. John, what can you share about the things you saw for points?
Um, so visiting Berchtesgaden and getting to visit both the underground um, chambers or underground caverns that had been set up by the SS, and then Eagle's Nest itself is an experience in and of itself. It's just firstly geographically amazing. I mean, you're in the Bavarian Alps. It's absolutely beautiful. We visited Berchtesgaden, Zell am See, and then Kemperon, which where 506 were billeted at the very end, where, as you said, they were, this is what the points was about. They had to serve their time there, wait their time there to make up their points. But we visited a couple of sites around Berchtesgaden, which were interesting because of what they represented. It was the second home for the Nazis. Hitler regarded it as a sort of a home or base for him. We visited the location of where his house was. It's ruined now. There's a remnants of what was the back wall of the property, an enormous property, destroyed by bombing at the end of the war, but then later in the 1950s by the sort of Allied forces anyway, just decided because they didn't want it to become a shrine. I can understand
Right.
that. But there are many other properties around there that was within this confined sort of restricted area that made up that many of the Nazi leadership had built homes to be close to him and close to each other, and those houses are still standing.
You make a good point there too, because in the series, when Webster was and everybody else was kind of questioning, did these Germans know back, near the concentration camp? They even say when they went to, the Eagle Nest area,
Yeah,
these are just for Nazis only.
yes,
That's these guys, you don't have to question that at all. Everybody that lives here only could live here if they're a Nazi. So
that's
you
right.
don't have to worry about that at all. So yeah, you make a very good point.
Yeah, yeah, and we saw, where there are sentry posts where you could go this far and then no further up the road. This was all restricted area, and so we visited that. That was fascinating. We actually stayed in a hotel built on the what was the ruin of one of those homes. And then we visited Eagle's Nest, and that in and of itself is an experience. Now, it's kind of interesting, guys, to visit Eagle's Nest because you know what it represents, but they chose not to destroy it. And I think that was the right choice because the and I'm an engineer, so the sheer engineering that went into building a sort of a three-room tree house or tea house at 8,000 feet on top of a mountain, and the elevator that runs all the way through, and you travel down a very long, tunnel into from the entranceway to essentially the center of the mountain, and then the elevator brings you up and you pop out in the Eagle's Nest building itself, and then you can hike a little bit further. There's a higher point which we did, and the views from there are amazing. But all of that was constructed with local labor, which was mostly forced labor. And so if you want to kind of justify why does something like this still exist today, it's not in commemoration of who used it. It's in commemoration of those who were sacrificed to build it.
Yes.
And it is a marvel of engineering. I mean, there's no question. And of course, the views from from that location at 8,000 feet, looking out over the Alps and looking down to Salzburg and looking down into Berchtesgaden itself are just amazing.
The historical footage that we might see of Hitler from Austria, is that where that was shot
A lot of
primarily?
it. A
Yeah.
lot of it. There are a lot of famous pictures of him in Eagle's Nest, sitting looking out from a sort of a patio area. That's there. There's a lot of pictures of him in the patio of the home that was built, which is now destroyed because of the view that it had. And somebody made the point to me, you can understand why someone thought they were top of the world when they were standing in a location with this sort of, panoramic view that we would consider to be all under their control. It would definitely, you could imagine it giving somebody this false sense of like,
Yeah, it's
you're empowered kind of
it's a
authority
beautiful
over.
view from there where you don't see the, atrocities going on
That's
below.
right.
Yeah.
But a lot
John,
of the planning, what was sobering for us was a lot of the planning of what occurred through this entire, you know, the Holocaust. A lot of that planning happened in that home, in that house, in that location.
So when you go up to the Eagle's Nest, t tell me how many rooms it is, how big it is, and you said something about a tea room. So it's not a
Yeah, it's not
residence?
a home. It wasn't a residence, and that's sometimes misreported. There are essentially three rooms, three, you know, physical spaces. One is much larger in the center, and then there's two somewhat smaller. It was really an entertaining location, Ken.
Okay.
So they describe it as a tea room, but it would have been where you brought people to have a meal or to have
Hmm.
a meeting, but you didn't stay there. There was no
Okay.
residence there to live in.
Hmm.
And there still isn't. It's used as a restaurant today. It's an active restaurant. But no, it was a tea room. It was anyway. He didn't live there.
Big fireplace in there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
the big question is, and I know they didn't find this at Eagle's Nest, but was there the whiskey that you want, Ken? The Vat, is it
The
Vat
VAT,
60?
VAT 69
Yeah.
that Nixon always
So
drank.
funny story. When we were at Eagle's Nest, our historian Matt produced a bottle, an actual bottle, and we all toasted Easy Company from the room on in
Nixie,
Eagle's Nest.
Nixon would be proud.
He would be
Absolutely.
proud.
What a
Yeah.
what a great moment. I would love to be there to do that. I hear VAT 69's not all that great, but
No.
historically that would be fun.
And they had trouble locating a bottle because it's not that freely available. It's
Yeah.
available, but not like readily available.
Yeah.
But they had secured a bottle and he produced it like a rabbit out of the hat while we were in the room in Eagle's Nest and said, "We're going to toast easy."
I'll
And
tell you
so
this.
we
I
did.
mean, Nixon didn't always make the best choices, so who knows if it was good or not, right? He's a guy that didn't make great choices.
Yeah.
Guys, I can't tell you how much this was enjoyable for me. This is so much fun. Both of you have, shared in the places that you've been, and of course, John, the journey that you took with your son. It's just not only amazing to hear about the places you visited, but how you guys experienced it. And I think that's the most important thing. Any last words from your tour?
Yeah, you've enabled me to do something that we committed to do at the end of the tour. So this is, in a lot of ways, an opportunity of fortune for me. When Major Winters and Stephen Ambrose conceived the tour, and we've talked a lot about that and all of the detail he infused into it, but he also wrote an instruction at the end, which he insisted was read to all of the participants in Stephen Ambrose's tour of Band of Brothers at the end of the tour. So we had our end of tour dinner, kind of going away evening at the end of all of this in Austria, and Matt, who was our historian, read this note. This was the note written by uh, by Major Winters, Richard Winters, and he said, "Look," he said, you've spent a lot of money, you spent a lot of time to come on this tour, but you haven't earned your right to be on it yet. Your action is to return and to tell these stories. Share with others the experiences of the people, of the members of Easy Company, of the experiences they went through, the things they saw, the things that happened. That's your job. If you want to earn your right to have been part of this tour, that's the action you have to take. And so we all committed to doing it. And so you've given me an opportunity to do that I think in a compelling way. So I really appreciate that.
Well, that really truly warms my heart. You think about Major Winters up there in heaven with Dad, and maybe those two guys are looking down upon us, and you're like, you guys have done good. You've done what you've done, and you've been able to share that story as your marching orders, and I hope by being on this podcast and the things that we're talking about, we're doing our duty in sharing that, with the others that are important. And Ken, this is what you talked about from the get-go, how important it is to share these stories for future generations.
Yeah, for me, it started out as just trying to understand my legacy and what my father went through as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old back in 1944 and 45. And what it led to was me understanding who he was as a young man and what he went through, but also understanding the scope of this entire world at war and how it impacted so many people. And to keep that story alive, not just our dad's story, which was important to me, but to keep that story alive for all future generations. And my sons have embraced it. They, like your son John, and I'm sure your family members as well, Chris, are embracing it and understanding what took place because it was such a significant event in history. It's important that we keep these fires burning in the youth, that they understand what took place so we never repeat it.
Yeah, I agree.
Wow, it's incredible. And John, thank you for sharing everything that you did share here today. And it's nice to know that, of course, you are a friend. So if I'm in the woods and I yell out, flash, you're always going to say thunder.
Thunder.
Thanks again. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, John was a great guest, a wealth of information, very well spoken. And I was fascinated, Chris, how you and I have this interest and this fever to learn more and more about World War II because of our dad. But here's John, an Irishman, who, as a young kid, was into it from the beginning, and then he got the sobering acknowledgement from his grandma what it was like to live through it, and he's done more research since then. And to go on that Band of Brothers tour as he did, he just had great stories, and he mentioned the distances that you realize when you're standing right there, how those distances impact you, to recognize what those men truly went through, and for him to do it all the way from Toccoa all the way through the Eagle's Nest and everything in between. He'll never forget that. And to go with his son, how special was that as well? So he was a great guest, and I learned so much from him.
Yeah, for what he did and not having this connection like we have, it's not his relative doing it. He has a love for this well. So you know how powerful that was. And to get dedicate, those couple weeks to seeing all those sights, it just kind of shows kind of the man he is and how powerful these stories are because they resonate through all different cultures and all different kind of people,
Hmm.
not only the relatives, but also people that have no real direct link to those that served during World War II. So yeah, it was an incredible thing. But going back to Band of Brothers, this has always kind of baffled me, and I'm not sure if you know this answer, but all the time that they're in battle, right? It's confusion, it's loud noises, and they're talking and they're screaming at each other. And during those battles, they're either screaming two things that I notice: covering fire and suppression fire. Do you know what the difference is?
Yeah, you're right, Chris. That in those most heated moments, that you hear that called out a lot. And the call, whether it was covering fire or suppression fire, was very important because it meant what they were going to do. So covering fire, you're familiar with the term "cover me." Well,
Yeah.
covering fire is if the platoon sergeant wants to conduct an offensive move. In other words, he wants to get one or two or three guys from point A to point B. So you do covering fire to get them closer so that they can throw a hand grenade in a machine gun nest or something like that. So that's covering fire.
Okay.
Suppression fire is more defensive in nature, where the enemy is attacking and moving forward upon your guys, and you've got to put a stop to it or you're going to lose that ground. So suppression fire is to just lay down a base of fire to keep those guys at bay so they cannot advance any further. So covering fire is defensive, suppression fire, or covering fire is offensive, suppression fire is defensive.
Interesting. Interesting.
I have a question for you. So, you're a big fan of the series as I am, and you'll see a lot of the hand signals given when they
Yeah.
don't want to speak too loudly. You'll see that. Have you ever interpreted what those hand signals mean?
Yeah, I had just such I had to know, I did some
Yeah.
research after watching all these episodes, and I have a couple to share with you, and one I think you'll find really interesting. Of course, you'll see them go like this, which means halt, right? You got to
Okay.
halt. Everybody stop. If you see this is freeze. So not only you walk and halt, you just kind of stop. Freeze means don't move a muscle. Don't even think about moving a muscle. And another interesting one, and I don't know how much we saw this during the episodes, was this means double time. Like we got to get
Oh,
there quick. Let's go double time. So
okay.
that I thought that was really cool. But what struck me very much is they always had to do numbers, right? They were doing numbers, and I
Yeah.
was like, "What are those all about?"
Yeah.
And in the episode of Breakor Manor, when they're there, Buck Compton gives the following numbers that I'll give to you, and then I'll
Okay.
explain to you what they mean. He
Okay.
gives one, right? Four, two, and then he stops. Then he goes 2, 5, 0. Any idea what that means?
I have no idea.
Well, he was saying, according to this, episode, that there is one MG 42 25 yards away.
Really?
That's what I heard. Now, of course, we're just speculating because I
Yeah.
also read that some of these hand signals weren't truly used in World War II, that some of them were adopted for the series from Vietnam.
Interesting.
But I'm sure World War II guys use those hand signals
Yeah.
to, especially the freeze, because they're on patrol and they want to be, you know, detected. But I thought that
Right.
was incredibly educating, especially knowing when they're doing the numbers. Because another thing that I saw that was really cool is, if they did this, that's two, right? If they did it this way, seven.
Oh,
Everything that's sideways, you add five to. So
oh,
this
that's
is
yeah,
this is
brilliant.
four, right?
Right.
And
Right.
add five to, this is nine,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Huh.
So
That is fascinating.
anytime that we're watching these episodes again and you see that happening, I think it's important to try to figure out what maybe the numbers correlate to what they're seeing in the episode.
I
But it
will
was
pay
very
close
good.
attention to that next time I watch it, which will probably be tomorrow.
Yes, I know you will, and I will be right there with you
Yeah.
watching those things. But I can't thank you enough for being here because, this is so important to us, and for you to share where you were and then compare it with where John was. It really, draws a great picture for all of us that weren't there yet to see exactly what we're looking at and what those guys experienced. And also, I want to thank all of you for, of course, watching or listening. You've been joining us through this whole process, and especially for this episode of our World War II Dad. So if you have any questions or thoughts or, stories to share of your own World War II dads or granddads or uncles or moms or any of those people, we'd love to hear from you. So drop us a comment below on YouTube or shoot us an email at info@ourworldwar2dad.com. That's OURWW, the number two, DAD.com. For my brother Ken Cangella, I'm Chris Cangella. Thanks again to John Healy, and thanks to all of you to help keep these stories alive where you are and here on our World War II Dad. Thanks for watching and listening to our World War II Dad. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss an episode.
And if you're just listening to the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it.